So that note that is there for you all to take notes, go back and refer to it often throughout the week. I think that's a great tool that we have to use. Um, and also, hopefully, now as we're going through and we're adding more and more teaching to our archive, just know that we have a new space in the writer's block called Teaching Archives. So hopefully you saw there was a post about that, but you have to join that space. And at the end of this week, we'll have all three of Melissa's teachings will be posted in there. You can see Jana's are already in there. And so hopefully that'll be an easier way to organize material instead of having to scroll through as we grow and go on. The scroll will get longer. So hopefully that will be a helpful thing. So and yeah, with that, let's get started. I'm so excited today to talk with Melissa Smith. She's going to talk to us about how a vision statement can guide our creative journeys. And so Melissa, tell us a little bit about you and your background with writing and kind of how you came into this kind of specific knowledge that you are going to share with us today.
Sure. So I'm in Texas, first off. I'm married to my husband of 23 years this year. So we have teenagers, one in college, one launching to college in the fall, and then a 13-year-old son who we chase around. He's our most social, vibrant go-getter, and we don't know where he came from because we're introverts, quiet people, and he's not. But words have been a part of my life forever. So I've been writing since I was super little, and all my teenage angst got poured into journals and poetry and entering contests, that kind of thing. And then in high school, I had the most fantastic English teacher ever. And I went to a small Christian high school. And so I had him for 3 years. And he taught me to love not just words, but thought, how to look at the big picture of a story and what's the meaning and what's the truth in there? What's the beauty? How do we pull ideas from it? And from that, I wanted to become an English teacher. So that's what I did. Taught for a couple of years, started having children, decided to stay home with them and homeschool. And so, over the years, words and writing looked a lot of different ways. Journaling was always there. I blogged for a little while, but it was like a private blog where I just wrote about my family. And just side note, if you don't know about this, when I closed that blog, I wanted to keep it because I also love photography. And so I had all this photography of our family and all these words about my family, and I didn't want to lose it. So if you go to blog2print.com, they will print your blog. So I have my blog printed in a hardback book that has all of my words and my family's history there. So that's a wonderful keepsake. But
Yeah.
So how did I land here? So I started writing for a reader many years ago, but it was interesting is after a season of a lot of suffering and change in our life, and I found Hope Writers, and I started writing on a website and learning how to write for a reader and submitting articles to websites, that type of thing, getting published out there in the world. But over the course of time, it constantly shifted who I was writing to and what I was writing about, but words have always been there. There's teaching Bible studies and leading small groups, so words were always a part of who I was, but writing was that common thread through all of it, that it was how I processed the world. It was how so I say often that sometimes I don't know what I'm thinking till I say it. And so as I would journal, I would wrestle out those things that I was wondering about God, or I was struggling with my children, or I was wrestling with in my own heart. And so as I wrote those things, or as I talked with a friend about them, I would get clarity on what was important, and what was true and what was beautiful. And that has become part of the vision statement for my life, is really looking for those beautiful and true things and how do we live them out.
I love that. When you were talking about not knowing what you think until you write it out, there's
Yeah,
this great Flannery O'Connor quote that says, "I don't know what I think until I read what I write."
yeah,
And I think that that's so true. Like feel that all the time. It's like, oh, I'm curious where this is going to go.
yes,
Because I feel
yes,
like I get changed in that process of writing, and journaling is
right.
such a great way to figure out where you're at in life, even when
It is,
you're
and it's
dealing with
interesting
family
too.
things or just wrestling with
Yes,
questions. So helpful.
yeah. And it's interesting too, as we get into this vision statement piece too, it's interesting when you look back at all of the things that you've written over years, it's often there's themes there, right? Like you may not realize that you've been writing on these two or three things for decades.
Yeah.
And then you look back and go, oh, I've been writing about that a really, really long time. Like that is so a part of who I am that I can't not write those things.
Yeah. Yeah, and so much of that is just a process of discovery,
Yeah.
and just showing up and doing that. And so tell us a little bit about like um, what changed for you over time. You mentioned this period of really a lot of hardship, that kind of, I know this about you from another conversation, that it was a
Right.
time that really kind of influenced and kind of shaped your writing
Yeah.
process. So tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about that and what that led to.
Sure. So, as I mentioned already, I homeschooled my children, but there was this season of life for about 7 years where there was just constant difficulty and constant suffering and constant change. And I was writing through all of that, but just in a journal, right? I was processing with God, I was praying, and it kind of came to a head. It was about 2017, 2018, where we were no longer homeschooling. So I was fired from that job. Yeah, that's how it felt, right? And I had been partnered with a friend and walking alongside her in her suffering for many, many years. And she moved overseas. And like right at the height, like we had to go to court where she was, trying to get custody of her nieces. And it was a lot. We were in a spiritually abusive church, had to leave that church. And, so we lost friends and fellowship. Our house flooded in Harvey. Like, I'm not kidding when I say it was just all of the things converged onto just this one space in time. And at in the fall, as we're like rebuilding our house and my kids are no longer at home, I'm not homeschooling them anymore. This friend has moved. We don't have no church. I kind of sat there, you know, unsure anymore, really, of all of the roles and responsibilities I had been filling had changed. And so it was this almost like an identity crisis where, okay, all of the things I know to do, I no longer am doing anymore. So, God, what do I do with my time? How do I fill it? And it was in that season that writing became much more important in my life. One, for healing and just processing all of those things and going, okay, Lord, what are you teaching me? What are you doing through this? And then I had more time because my kids weren't home in that season. So, what do I do at that time?
Mm.
And that's really where I began to pivot more to writing for a reader. At the time, that reader was mostly me. It was, how I write a lot about joy. That's always been true. In that season, I wrote a lot about how do you have joy in suffering.
Mm.
And I just poured my heart, soul, and everything I had into my website at the time, processing those things. What does it look like to suffer with a friend? What does it look like to have joy when everything outside of you is not joyful? Um, and I remember at one point I had sent my website like ideas to a friend, and she was like, all the language I was using on my website at the time was like, writing to overwhelmed women and writing to women in suffering. And she's like, but you're all about joy. Are you sure that's what you want to write about? And I was like, well, yeah, in this season, I do, because that's what I've got, right? That's what God's given me. That's what I've got. So from that, God really turned my heart toward women and encouraging faith-filled women to really lean into who God's designed them to be and to build lives of beauty and purpose, and even in the midst of suffering, right? And he gave me a season to do that because I had all these other things taken off my plate. And so he said, okay, write
Mm.
these messages that I've put on your life. I have been writing messages into your life for decades. Now it's time for you to write those for other people. And where the vision statement piece of that comes in is I love organization and checklists. I can structure anything for you. If you are lost and how to move forward, I can help you with that. But the problem with that is I was finding often I was having very busy, productive days. I was getting a lot done, but it was not the things that were most important. And they were not the things that I really believe God was giving me to do in that season. And so I said, okay, well, I'm good at structuring priorities and goals. What piece am I missing? And it was that vision statement piece of it's not so much about what you're doing, it's about who God has called you to be.
Mm.
And so when I looked back at my life, even though my life had been completely changed, the things God had put inside of me were the same. You know, that pursuit of beauty and the pursuit of truth and the pursuit of joy, it just looked really different in that season. And I had to sort through, okay, even though my roles and responsibilities are different, the vision God has for my life is the same. And that's to glorify Him in these particular ways. And so a vision statement, that's really what it does. It moves us away from aligning our lives to our roles and responsibilities, and instead aligning our lives to who God has made us to be in Him. And for me, that was a major shift, and it gave me a lot of freedom to let go of controlling my circumstances and saying, okay, next year might look really different, but I can still be this person God's called me to be, even if all my relationships change and all my roles change and all my responsibilities change. This woman that God has designed me to be can move forward with hope and with confidence.
That's so great. And I think that having crafted a few vision and mission statements in the past for different organizations I've been a part of, like the mission statement is like that's where you live day to day. Like when
Mm-hmm.
you're thinking about the mission of your um, let's just say business, because that's usually where we use.
Right.
But the vision is like a 30,000-foot level, right? It comes
Yes.
up a little higher from whatever it is that you're kind of dealing with in the moment. Like what you said, like even when things change in my life, this vision can still go forward,
Right.
because it's more about like structuring who you are and how you're responding to the world around you, come what may.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So my family, we just got back from Colorado. We love hiking and being outside, that kind of thing. So the analogy I like to use for this is a vision statement is like the compass, right? A compass always points north, right? And it keeps you on track. No matter which way you're facing or what path you're on, the compass points north. And a vision statement is like that. It points you north. It keeps your eyes focused on Christ. It keeps you rooted and grounded in Him and who He's created you to be. And that gives you the freedom to be anywhere on the mountain you need to be, right?
Hmm.
Because you know where north is.
Mhm.
Um, and so then in my solo teaching, we're going to get into priorities and goals, but those would be the priorities then are the map. That's going to be, where you are in that season on the mountain. Which path do I need to take? What's most important right now? And then goals are the actual steps you're taking on the path. You have to get from point A to point B. Goals are going to get you there, but you're constantly coming back to that compass of what's true north. What has God put in me? Who am I in Him? Am I rooted? Am I grounded in Christ? And then that gives you so much freedom and so much joy and so much confidence to co-collaborate with Him and say, okay, God, I thought we were going on this path, but it seems like you're directing me over here. Okay, let's go. Let's follow where He's leading.
And north is still north, right?
north is still north.
So no matter what path you're taking, that vision statement can keep you going in the same, maybe it's a different direction, but you're still
Yeah.
following the same point. You're still
Yes.
moving towards God in that way. So that I love
Yeah.
that illustration and that picture. I think that's helpful for
Yeah, for
us.
sure.
So
I
go ahead.
well, go ahead.
I was going to ask a next question. So you finish your thought there.
Well, I was just gonna say, I don't know if y'all know who Sherry Gregory is. She's written a bunch of books and co-written with some people. And I'm so sorry. I tried to find which book she had talked about this in, but she's a writer, speaker, blogger, all the things. But in one of her books, she talked about how at one point in her life she was, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book. Like that was her purpose and her focus, but the book wasn't happening. And so she finally had to back off from that a little bit and go, okay, what's happening here? What do you want me to do, God? And it's the same idea that she realized the book was just one means of accomplishing what God had really given her to do. And what God had given her to do was minister to women in this particular way. And under that umbrella, that, that compass, that true north, she could write a book or she could start a podcast or she could minister in her church or, so there were all these many things she could do to be this woman that God had called her to be. And when she realized that, she set the book aside and said, okay, I'm not going to write a book in this season. I'm going to do these things instead. But then eventually the book came, and I think that's the freedom of a vision statement is we don't have to get so laser focused on this one thing we think we need to do. That might come in a season, but God may also put that on pause for a season and say, it's not time to do the podcast. It's not time to do the book. It's time to do this other thing first. But when our eyes are focused on Him, we can set that aside without worrying, am I ever going to get the book done? And we can go, well, if God wants me to write the book, I'll write the book in the right season at the right time.
Yeah. So do you think that vision statements can change over time, or do you think that fundamentally they stay the same and it's just the path changes?
I think they can get tweaked over time for sure. I mean, I think, 46-year-old Melissa is ministering in very different ways than 22-year-old Melissa did. But let's see if I can find it. I have it pulled up here. I was going to read you my vision statement. Looking for it. I think who I am and the way that God has called me to minister to people is the same way I was when I was an RA in college. When I was an RA in college, I was still pointing people to Christ. I was encouraging them. I was using my words to help them figure out what it is to walk with Christ and have a life of purpose and beauty. That's still who I am. That's still what I'm doing. But now I do that through online classes, and I do that through coaching writers, and I do that by raising my teenagers. So the things I'm doing are very different, but my heart, my vision statement is still to co-collaborate with Christ, to strengthen faith-filled women, and to help them cultivate a life of beauty and purpose. That's basically my vision statement. 20-year-old Melissa would have said that a little differently, but the things, the way that I function is kind of the same. It's a little bit more specific now because I'm a grown woman and I'm doing some different things than I did when I was in my 20s. But I think when you get to the priorities and goals, that's where it changes in each season that you're in. My priority right now is focusing on coaching, faith-filled writers and creatives. But that aligns with that vision.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I think that in the business world too, I think that those are the things they kind of preach that your vision really shouldn't change much, right?
Right.
You have this true north in which you're going. The means by which you get there may change and you have to be adaptable and all of those things, but that's kind of the big overall thing. So what would you say in terms of, and maybe you're going to go into this a little bit more tomorrow, or when are you teaching again?
Thursday, I think.
Thursday, I'm sorry. So are there certain things that you would say, maybe help? What if somebody is saying, I don't even know where to start? Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to steal from Thursday's teaching, but is that something you might be able to share with us a little bit? Like,
Sure.
where can I even start if I'm not sure what my vision is for my life?
Yeah. So I know Jana talked some about being called to be a writer, and I'm going to just put these 3 points out there about calling. I have some scriptures I can share about them too. But for me, the way I define calling is, our calling doesn't change. Our calling is to love God. So delighting in Him and in relationship with Him, glorifying Him. So that's our life and the things that we do, both public and private, and then loving others. And so that's, serving and having a relationship with other people. But your vision statement is really the specific ways that you do that, And so the questions I would ask somebody who's saying that is, go to the people in your life who you're closest to and ask them, how does God use me in your life? What are the ways that you have seen God at work in my life? I would say, look at the whole of your life, like even your childhood, like what were the things that you are bent toward? What are your creative designs? What are your gifts? What are your specific talents? And then I think our experiences are a big piece of this too, right? I didn't ask for those years of suffering, but they changed me, and they changed the way that I labor with women. They've changed the way that I see suffering. They've changed the way that I write. They've changed the way that I see my relationship with God. And so even your unique experiences deeply affect your vision statement and how you see the world and how you function in it. And so those are the things that I would point people to is, ask the people closest to you. How do you see, one, God at work in my life? Number two, how do you see God using me in the lives of others? And then just doing a personal inventory of what are your gifts? What are your skills? What are your interests? And then what are the specific experiences God has allowed in your life, both good and difficult, that create this beautiful canvas of this is what your life looks like and this is how God is at work in it. And that points you to that true north of, okay, who is God in your life and how is He working in it?
I think it's so important to ask other people too. Like, I think that we all have this self-awareness, but a lot of times we're too close to ourselves to really be able to see that.
Yeah,
Um, we're too in the forest to see the trees sometimes. And so I think that is a collaborative thing.
it
Um,
is.
and yet you have to be careful with that, right? That
Yes.
you ask trusted people who know you and love you and can help you discern some of those
Yes.
that you're seeing or
Prayerfully
hearing
navigate
reflected
that.
back to
Prayerfully
you.
navigate it. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
100%. Yeah, I remember it was really interesting. So in that season, we were at this, really unhealthy church, and it's very small, and we were tangled up with leadership and all sorts of things. And for me, it was a really difficult season. But I remember that there was this young woman there, and she was like, I'm so glad to be here with you because you bring so much joy to this space, even though this space is really difficult. And I remember being very startled by that because I didn't feel joyful in that space because it was so challenging. But that was one of those moments where God was like, pay attention to this. This is a way that I'm at work in you, even in difficult places. And those are, I mean, Emily P. Freeman says, pay attention to the arrows in your life. For me, that was an arrow saying, pay attention to the ways that God is at work in both the really joyful spaces in your life and the really challenging spaces, because that's going to tell you something about how He's made you.
Yeah, I love that. And I think too that it gives us as an opportunity to speak life into other people. Like, I think, just somebody saying to you, you're so joyful, when in your heart you're like, I am fighting for joy.
Yeah.
That is such a powerful thing. And I think so often, like, I know in my heart, like, I'm like, why don't I just say the things I'm thinking more often when I come across people? Because I know that often that is such a life-giving thing when you say
Yes.
to somebody, hey, I see this in your life. Like
Yeah.
this is a neat thing. This is a way to encourage other people. And I'm always like, oh God, help me to be better at that. Um,
Yeah.
I think that that's really a powerful, powerful thing, especially when we're
It is.
struggling.
It is. And I mean, I talk about this with all of my writing people, but I have a file on my computer, a words of affirmation file of, handwritten notes that I've scanned in and, things people have said to me, not just about writing, but about my spiritual life and relationships, my marriage, my parenting, all of those things, because we need that, right? We need that perspective. We need those reminders. I think in particular to our writing life, we need that encouragement when we're doubting and we're wondering, does this message matter? Is anybody going to read it? Is all of this work that I'm putting into it, going to make a difference for the kingdom? Having those words of affirmation, it points us back to that true north, right? It points us back to, this is how God is at work in me. This
Yeah.
is how God is, teaching me and growing me. And it keeps us on track even when the noise in our head and the critics outside of us too are causing us to doubt. So we can go back and say, no, this is still true to the vision that God has cast for my life.
Yeah, absolutely. So what would you say, how does having this vision statement that you're going to be challenging us in this week, how does it add structure and or freedom in what we're doing creatively? Like if I think about a vision statement, is that really like something that you refer to often to say, hey, I have this opportunity over here. Does this line up with what I'm doing?
Yeah,
Or I have this new idea over here. Like, is this taking me off track? Or, tell us a little bit about how you think
sure.
that vision statement like meets you like at ground level when you're
Yeah.
walking through your creative life and wondering what to do next.
It was really interesting, when you're going to teach on something, God allows you to walk through that as you're sorting it out. So, in the past, in all the churches I've been in, I've taught the Bible. I've led small groups. That's who I've been. That's what I've done. And in our new church, that's not what God's giving me to do. It's super interesting. So, um, separate from our church, I call it the Creative Collective, but we use the church facility. We meet once a month and we do all things creative. We do photography and painting and writing, but all pointing to and grounded in the truth of who God is. It's pointing to beauty and truth. But because of that, a lot of the women from our church come to that. And so that's how they see me. They see me as a creative person. So we had a women's event recently and I got, tagged as the table decorator. And because I'm the creative person, I'm not a table decorator, friends. Like that is not my thing at all. But it turned out fine and it was good. But I was wrestling with some of that, honestly, because I was like, no, I teach the Bible. I don't decorate tables. Like like I was seriously struggling with it. And my my husband finally sat me down and he was like, Melissa, you care about beauty, right? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, and you care about making spaces joyful and welcoming for women, right? You care about that. I was like, I do. And he was like, so why can't you be that person decorating tables just as much as someone who's standing up and teaching up about the Bible? And I was like, you're right. Like this totally aligns with my vision statement that in dec
Oops, we've got a little pause. There we go. You were paused there
okay,
for a minute.
sorry. All right. So that was an example of that was still in line with my vision statement that in decorating tables and creating a space for women to connect with one another, that was still pointing people to Christ and pointing people to joy. And it was still pointing people to beauty. It was just doing it in a very different way than I'm used to doing it. And so I had to align my heart and my mind with that. And because I get stuck, right? I get stuck in those roles and saying, well, this is how it has to look. And God was stretching me and saying, no, this is how I want you to do it this time. And for me, that was really hard at first because I was like, no, I teach the Bible. And he's like, no, you decorate tables. And I was like, okay. But for me, I think I'm learning to hold things much more loosely, right? Like right now in this season, yes, I'm teaching online and I'm coaching women and I'm doing all of these things. I don't assume that I'm going to be doing that next year. I assume that God may change that path for me. And if I hold to Him and I stay rooted and grounded in Him, then that's going to be okay. It may be hard and I may have to make some shifts and changes, um, but it will be good and it will be beautiful. So I think a vision statement allows us to make those shifts and pivots, right? That when you recognize that what God is asking you to do is something different than you've done before, you can go back to that vision statement and go, is this still true? Is this still who God is? Is this still who God has made me? And am I willing to say yes to Him, even if the thing He's asking me to do looks different? And so I joke that I'm actively avoiding writing a book. I don't want to write a book, but I have lots of people in my life that keep telling me you need to write a book. And ironically, I have the whole book outlined. Like I know what the book is. I just don't want to write it. And so, I think that goes back to the vision statement, right? It's like, is that book in line with the vision? Yes, it is. Is this the right season to write it? I don't think so. Not yet. That's going to be somewhere else on the path. And when and if God, tells me to be obedient and write the book, I'll do it. But for now, I believe the things He's asking me to do are these things. It's, the writer's block, it's the coaching. That's the vision statement. And then, the priority in this season is these things, these relationships and these communities God has given me to steward. And eventually that priority might be writing a book, but it's not right now. That might be in the future. So I think that's how that gets worked out in real life is we all know that it's constantly changing. Our relationships are changing, our work is changing, maybe we move, maybe our husbands, change jobs or our kids move out of the house. And so we can keep going back to, okay, how has God built me? What is He doing in my life? And what is He asking me to steward in this season? And that's how that gets worked out practically is those priorities and goals are seasonal and they're going to change, but the vision statement stays the same.
I was just thinking about the seasons actually, and just thinking that, yeah, I think that the vision stays the same. The seasons change too. Like in the back of your mind, you're thinking, yeah, a book may be off in the future sometime. It's just not this season. Right now, this season, I'm stewarding these areas of ministry or oversight or creativity differently.
Yeah.
But knowing that that might be another season, there's so much freedom in that, right? Like that we can, like you said, I loved how you said, I have open hands, I'm holding things loosely. And I think that, that so often, like we freak out when God changes things. And like, if there's anything that's constant in life, it's that it's going to change. So we need to get better at being willing to change those things. I mean, it's never easy or always pleasant, but change will come for sure.
It does come. And so I'm a writing coach, but as a writing coach, I also have a writing coach. So I was meeting with her at one point and she said, we constantly hear this question of what does success look like? And she said, but I don't want to ask you that question. I want to ask you, what does obedience look like? And I was like, oh, interesting.
Yeah, that's a different question.
It's a different question. And I think that's the difference too between, I think a vision statement helps us align to that more than what does success look like. Like at the beginning of the year, I had a new website I was launching. I redesigned it, but I was wanting to write on it regularly. And And I wasn't. Like, I kept scheduling time to write and I kept not keeping the appointments consistently. And I was getting really frustrated about it. And I finally, really sat down and prayed about it. And I was like, okay, God, what is happening here? Like, why am I not writing the words? And what eventually came out is I just needed to pivot a little bit. The message had changed a little bit. The target audience had changed a little bit. And I was still trying to write over here to this audience because that was the last thing I thought I was supposed to do. And God was like, come over here, like shift, pivot. And I just wasn't doing it. But once I pivoted, success looks like being obedient to God and saying, this is a new thing and I need to be willing to change and write the new message, write it a little differently than I have before. I decided success was getting this message out once a week. And God was saying, that's not what I want you to do. So I could have been successful at that, but I would not have been obedient if I had been doing that. And so I think the vision statement is a piece of that, but then we also have to just prayerfully look at our season and go, but how do I steward that in this season?
Yeah.
And that might look different than it did the last season.
Yeah, that's so great. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about how to actually craft those vision statements. I think that I think obedience is what success looks like, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think that is truly the measure of success, is how obedient we are. And so I really look forward to seeing how those vision statements will help us kind of discern, right?
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
we are, where we're going. Yeah. So Melissa, you mentioned that you have a writing coach and that you are also a writing coach. So tell us a little bit about that and how our members can kind of learn more about what you're doing and how that might be a benefit to them.
Sure. So as I've already said, I talk about joy a lot. So my website is framedinjoy.com. And I have some free resources there if you want to download them. One is a 15-page resource called Refresh and Focus, and it's all about dreaming with God and how do we. It's the high level part before you get to a vision statement of what is it to dream with God? What is it to access that deep relationship with God and say, hey, these desires you've given me are from you. So I have the freedom to dream them up and say, okay, what do you want me to do with them? And so that resource talks about dreaming with God, and then how do you take those dreams and practically start implementing them with priorities and goals. But I love to work with faith-filled women who are wanting to steward their creativity, but they're bogged down in everyday life, right? They're working full time, or they're moms, or it's like this permission thing, right? How do I give myself permission to do this creative thing because it doesn't feel productive? but it is, right? Because it's stewarding the gifts and the talents and the joy that God has given you. And so even if it's something that you are enjoying simply with God and it's not even public facing yet, it's beautiful and it's good and it's worth doing. So I love working with writers. I love working with creatives to help them get that mindset of what does it look like to co-collaborate with Christ, and then just practically, how do I make time to do the things that God's given me to do? And how do I create systems and rhythms and routines to be able to do that on a regular basis so that I can steward the message God's given me? So framedinjoy.com, that's where you can find me.
That's so great. I love, as you're talking about it, I'm thinking, oh, this is art and heart of writing, right? Because we're talking about the art of writing is about creating these systems and these vision statements and these time management techniques that we can use to improve our writing, to improve our output of creativity. But the heart has all got to be connected to God and to our relationship with him, our position in Christ. And so I love that. Sounds like what you're doing is just completely aligned with the art and heart of writing.
Yes. I was gonna we still have a couple minutes, don't we? I wanted to share a book with you guys and a quote from it. But back in that season that was so difficult, I had read What Happens When Women Say Yes to God by Lisa TerKeurst. And in it, she says, "My steps so often portray the desire of my heart, but it is not my perfect performance that captures his attention. Rather, it is my complete dependence on him that he notices." And I just love that so much. And I think that aligns too with what we're talking about with vision statements, that a vision statement is not about you being more productive or doing the writing life perfectly or getting all the words out. A vision statement is really about your relationship with God and being rooted and grounded in him so that he can then produce the fruit. It's about that joy of walking with him. And then whatever else comes out of that, that's all in his hands, right? We just get to steward that relationship with him and be dependent on him.
I love that. I love that. Well, let's open it up for any questions. Melissa has a few more minutes. She's got another call she's got to jump on. So I want to respect her time, but see if there are any questions that she can answer. We have a few comments. I don't know if you can see that in the chat, Melissa.
I'm pulling it up now.
Feel free to unmute yourself if there's anything you would like some clarification on. Go ahead, Cheryl. Oh, you got to unmute. You unmute yourself, Cheryl.
Oh, I thought I was hitting it.
There you go.
Thanks so much, Melissa. I appreciate
Yeah.
everything you've shared so far. I wanted to ask you to repeat the things that we're supposed to ask those close to us. I wasn't sure I got those down right, because
Sure.
that would be really helpful.
So one is, how have you seen God at work in my life? So just how do they see God working in you? But then the other one is, how do you see God working through me? So one of the things I've asked, and it took courage to ask, and you have to ask people that you trust, but how has God used you in their life? I see that I froze. Did you get that?
Yeah. So you want them, because I know, like, I'm thinking of my sister who is super close to me. She's going to say through your writing. So we want them to be more specific. We want them to be, you know, more specific than that. Or is that kind of just a confirmation?
It's up to you. I like more specific than that. Like, what specifically about my writing? You know, is it how I, illustrate truth? Is it, like, what is it about the way that I communicate, or what is it about the way that I interact in my relationships? What is it that I'm doing that you see God in me, or that God conveys truth to you, or that God somehow works in your life through me?
Okay.
Because I think sometimes, like Kara said, we're so blind to it. We know we're writers, and we're, people are impacted by our words, but I think sometimes we don't know how. How are they impacted by our words? Is it that I really explain scripture well? Is it that I have good illustrations? Is it that I'm super transparent and honest in my writing? Is it the creativity? Is it that I see you when I talk to you? Like, I recognize that you're suffering, and just that being seen is meaningful to you. We don't see that. We don't know. We're just going out there being ourselves, right? But when somebody can say, when you showed up at church on Sunday and you greeted me by name, that made me feel seen. To us, we just do that, right? But to that person, it was everything. And that's helpful for us to know, okay, that's how God's using me. That's important to know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Stacy. You want to unmute? There you go.
Two things that you said that were really impactful, and I think one of them will help the question that Cheryl just asked. You said about that you keep on your computer a file that has, basically words of encouragement that have been written to you.
Yeah.
And, and that made me think, even if you're on Instagram, or if you have a blog, or if you have put your writing out there in different places, there's feedback. I know, just the other day, I put something out on Instagram and I hadn't put anything out in a long time. And I got a private message from a young woman I used to be her women's pastor. And she was like, oh my gosh, those were the words I needed today. And here's why. And so those types of things, I think, help define out where it is that you are, where God is using you. I posted a quote last week when Jana was speaking about by, I don't remember his first name, Blackaby is his last name, but where basically said, look for the work of God, look for what he's already doing and then step into it,
Yeah.
and I think that that's kind of that. And then you also said something that was personally freeing for me, because it's a struggle. I think it's an ongoing struggle. And when I get into it, then I get off base. You said that you are specifically ministering to women, to faith-filled women. And that was really big for me, because for all the years of, that I've been a believer, which I became a believer as an adult, I've always felt like it was that, the thing that I was best at was encouraging and equipping the saints. But then I get, I would really like to lead people to Christ. I really would. I have not ever in 40 years, not once. I've planted a lot of seeds. I've watered a lot of seeds, and I've encouraged a lot of people who have come to him, in their early days. But it messes with my mind. And so, because I'm like, that is our commission. But just hearing you say it again, it's like, okay, wait a minute, it takes a whole body. We are a whole body.
It does.
And if my piece in that body is just to keep equipping and encouraging,
Yes.
and equipping and encouraging, that's still a part of the overarching redemptive story that God is writing on the world. So that was helpful for me personally. So thank you.
It is. Yeah, you're welcome. Well, and I think that's an important piece too, is where has God placed you, right? What circumstances has God put you in? What people has he put around you? And if you're faithfully loving and serving and ministering to those people, then you are being faithful and you're being obedient. And as God brings unbelievers into your life, and if those people are in your circle, love them, serve them, plant the seeds, do the things that God's given you to do. And I think we can put things on ourselves that God has not put on us, and then it hinders us from stewarding the work he has given us. So
I was thinking of that verse, and I maybe somebody knows the reference, but it's like, I planted and Paul watered, and
Yes.
and God gave the increase, right? And so you're a part of that work, Stacy, even if you're not seeing the necessarily the increase this side of heaven. That's still valuable work, part of the kingdom, for sure.
it is.
1 Corinthians 3:6. Thanks, Jana.
Well, I wanted to read this verse as we're finishing up today. Psalm 90:17. Let the beauty of the Lord our God be upon us, and establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. And I think that is a good summary of what a vision statement is, right? It's setting our gaze on the beauty of Christ, putting our hearts and our minds there first, and trusting that he will establish the work of our hands. That when our hearts and our minds are fixed there, he directs our steps, right? And so then we can begin to engage in the fruitful work that he's given us to do in that season. But the vision statement puts our hearts and our minds on Christ first.
Yes, and amen. That's awesome. Well, thank you, Melissa. Thank you all for being here. The replay will be up shortly. And we look forward to hearing more from Melissa on Thursday. And then she'll also do a live after Thursday too. So you'll have more opportunity to ask questions, get feedback, and that kind of thing. So we encourage you to do that this week. So, and that's it. Y'all, thank you
Thanks,
so much.
guys.
Have a
Thank
good
y'all.
day.
Bye.